Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Starfest Presents Morgan Murray. I'm Michelle Steinhusen. I'm the Starfest director, and I'm very excited about this afternoon. Morgan's book, Dirty Birds, is actually one of my favorite books from this year. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. This is a virtual event, but we do want it to be an interactive event. So please put your comments and your questions in the chat. Just make sure to switch your chat settings to everyone instead of panelists. And if you run into any technical questions, I have Lisa in the background keeping an eye on all of that. Also, if you haven't had a chance to purchase Dirty Birds yet, we will provide links to Audrey's Books and Glass Bookshop in the comments so that you can check that out. So I'm very happy to be broadcasting from St. Albert Public Library, which sits on Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. It's a great place to share all of these stories. So I am not going to talk for too long. Oops, not you. Because these gentlemen here are much more interesting than I am. First, I'll just do a very quick introduction. Morgan Murray. I found out about Morgan Murray actually by accident. I found an article about his wife, the cartoonist Kate Beaton, and then quickly found out that Morgan's book, Dirty Birds, was longlisted for Canada Reads. And then I read it, and then I said, this guy has to come to Starfest. So I am not lying when I say it is one of my favorite books from this year. So, and then Morgan made a great choice for interviewer. This is Vish from CKUA Radio, and I'm going again let you guys talk, but I just wanted to let you know I've added your podcast to my list of podcasts to listen to. So thank you for expanding my world. That is it. I'm leaving it to you. I will pop on at the end. Enjoy, everyone. And again, I really encourage you, put your comments and your questions in the chat. It's going to be fun.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Does it feel kind of like Morgan, like that's kind of like what I say to my kids when I drop them off somewhere? I'll be back in a while, check on you, stay out of trouble.
I'm going to the bar.
Going to the bar. I'll be back. I'm sure you'll be fine. Just hang in there. Yeah. No, it's nice to see you again, Morgan. First of all, where in the world are you today?
I'm in downtown Smithville, Cape Breton, in Nova Scotia, which is near the town of Mabou, which is in the middle of nowhere on Cape Breton Island. It's where my wife's from. It's where the Rankin family is from, the famous band. So it's a beautiful fall day here.
Very nice. Very nice. Very few people will say, just to situate you in terms of where I am, I'm in the middle. I'm next to the middle of nowhere. I'm not in the middle of nowhere, but right beside me, middle of nowhere. That's kind of funny in itself. So no, it's nice that I'm in Alberta. I'm in Edmonton. So it's nice that we're.
I like the decor of your house.
Oh yes, thank you. Yeah, I had this installed. I had a mural designed just for today, and then I'm going to scrub it all off. That's my project for the rest of the weekend.
Good luck. Good luck.
As you know, I think I'm a huge fan of your book, and we're going to get into it in a little bit. But as I say, you're in Cape Breton. I'm in Alberta. You have Alberta roots, right? Is that fair?
I do.
Where are you from?
I grew up in Caroline, Alberta, which is about 2.5 hours southwest of St. Albert. It's west of Red Deer, about an hour. It's the home of Kurt Browning, the greatest figure skater who ever lived, who wasn't named in the Pandora Papers or whatever they were, like Elvis Stoico, the worst figure skater who ever lived.
Why is he the worst? I have fondness for Elvis Stoico because he joined my wife and I twice on our college radio show, the Mish Vish Interracial Morning Show, many years ago. The first time I got him, I used to go at lunchtime at the University of Guelph. There was like a free skate, like at the rink, so I would go skating every lunch hour just for exercise. And the one day I connected with Elvis, and I convinced him to go with me. And so while some so some of us were doing like laps, but there's always in the middle, there were people practicing their figure skating. And the one day I brought Elvis, and I thought they were all like, what is happening? And I just thought that was funny. So I have a soft spot for Elvis, despite his inclusion in the Pandora Papers. But yes, Kurt Browning seems like a nice guy too.
He's the best. Him and Kurt and Elvis had a little bit of a friendly rivalry back in the day. So
right.
I'm very much Team Kurt. So I grew up in Carolina on a beef farm where my family still lives. My mom and dad and my sister and her 50 kids and her husband. And I went to the University of Calgary. I ended up in Montreal for a little while doing research for a book I didn't know I was writing at the time. And then I came to Newfoundland for grad school and met a girl from Cape Breton. And now I'm in Cape Breton with my wife, Kate Beaton, like Michelle mentioned, and we have 2 little babies. So
very nice. Oh, by the way, one of your babies is a relatively newcomer in terms of being on the planet. Is that correct?
He is. He's been here for 2.5 months now.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
So we're tired.
Oh, look, he already got you a mug.
He did. It just says dad, not number 1 dad or anything.
The vocabulary will come.
Yeah.
He's genetically predisposed to have a good vocabulary. Well, that's very lovely. And you mentioned your wife, Kate. For those who don't know, Kate is also very renowned in the arts and cultural realm. Is that fair to say?
She did. She is. And she drew the beautiful cover that is all over Vish's walls. So
for those who haven't seen the cover, it's right here. Actually, I have 2 editions of the book. I don't know if you can see that because of the green screen thing. You'll see one is glossy and includes like a library thing. I didn't steal this from the library. I want everyone to know that Morgan sent this. Let's just see here. I'll show you that I'm not a thief. Look at this. Look at this. Can you? Oh, sorry. Look, it looks like a library book. There's like a little library card, and then it says property de la Bibliothèque du Malend. I'm sorry about my French. And then you inscribed it, which is nice. So there's 2, but my point being, there's 2 versions of it. And then this is the less library one. Why are there so many versions of your book?
Well, I heard that authors selling books out of the back of their car is the only way you can make money selling books. So I found a really good deal on my book in Montreal at the Mile End Library. They were just giving them away. And so if you order a book off my website, I will send you a book borrowed from the Mile End Library. And when you're done, you just drop it back off there. And hopefully I don't get too many late fees.
I don't think they're giving them away. Those are loaners. You're supposed to give them back to the library. That's how libraries work.
Oh, no.
Oh my God, you just absconded with multiple copies of your own book? Now people won't be able to read it.
Could you send me back that copy that I sent you?
Yeah, sorry, I know the overdue fine. It's been a year, so the overdue fines are going to be exorbitant. I gather that, but anyway. No, it's a beautifully designed book. So Kate was involved in the design. We'll get into the format and structure in a minute, but for those who haven't yet read the book, Morgan, as much as you want to without spoiling anything, can you summarize this book for people who aren't familiar with Dirty Birds?
Sure. So it's 2007. Barack Obama is about to become president. It was the good old days before coronavirus or the stock market collapse and real estate bubble of 2008 and all that fun stuff. And there's a young guy from the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan, a little town called Belly Button, Saskatchewan. Good luck finding that on a map. And his name is Milton, Ontario, not to be confused with Milton, Ontario, the town in Ontario. And he grows up in the middle of nowhere. He goes to college in Moose Jaw. He graduates and he decides that the thing he's going to be when he grows up is a famous poet and ladies' man like his hero Leonard Cohen. And so he saves up and gets on the bus and goes to Montreal to meet Leonard Cohen and become a world famous poet and ladies' man, as you do. And well, it doesn't really work out for him. And I think I'll tell you a little bit more about it as we go, but he kind of falls backwards into all these terrible misadventures and has a really bad time. And it's fun for everyone but him.
Right. Now, you mentioned a few of the places you've lived in your life. You lived in Alberta. Have you ever lived in Saskatchewan?
I have not, but my mother was born in Moose Jaw, and my mother's side of the family are Newfoundland, that's Saskatchewan expatriates to Alberta. They moved when she was 2, I think. So every year I'd go back and visit my great grandma in Riverhurst, Saskatchewan, and I'm half Saskatchewan, I guess.
Oh, you are? Okay, so you have some Saskatchewan roots. You and I first met in person well before the invention of Zoom in
Yes.
St. John's, Newfoundland. I don't know, what was it, like 2013, 14, 15, something like that?
Yeah, the early teens.
Early teens. Were you living there at the time?
Yeah, I was going to grad school there, and then I worked at the university for several years afterwards because I just wouldn't leave. So
right, and there's a character in the book from St. John's, I believe. It's from Newfoundland anyway, right?
yeah,
right.
Naughty is his. Milton moves to Montreal. In the apartment he moves into, there's 3 roommates that are strangers to him when he moves in, and one of them is named Naughty Butts from St. John's, Newfoundland. And he's a bit of a handful, and he kind of takes Milton under his wing and is a horrible influence on him and gets him into all kinds of trouble.
Is that symbolic of your time in St. John's, Newfoundland while you were there? Did St. John's get Morgan Murray in trouble?
Yes and no.
This is not a police interview or an interrogation of any sort. Nothing you say will be held against you in the course of this discussion. So whatever happened, share it with us.
Without incriminating myself too much, Newfoundland is full of characters. You can't, kick a rock without hitting a character. And if you ever go to Newfoundland, for people who haven't and you're thinking about it, you should. It's very much its own place with its own culture and everything. And it's unlike anywhere you'll ever be. But when you get there, even if you drove all the way there, take a taxi at one point, because the taxi drivers are all the most incredible people you'll ever meet in your life. And you probably won't understand them, but they'll talk your ear off. And so just the richness of those kinds of characters, I needed to include something like that in the book. So I just kind of amalgamated all the funny encounters and people that I'd met in my Newfoundland adventures into this Naughty Butts character and let him go.
Right. So you have Naughty Butts representing St. John's, where you lived, and then Montreal, you lived there as well. I know from our previous encounters and discussions about the book that the dingy apartment with the transient roommates that is depicted in Montreal, that is depicted in the book, it mirrors an experience you had living in such a place in Montreal. Is that correct?
Yes. So I'm telling people now that my moving to Montreal wasn't to become a famous poet and ladies' man. That didn't pan out. It was research for this novel that I didn't know I was writing until about 10 years later. But yeah, I moved to Montreal after I graduated from the University of Calgary and moved into an apartment that I found on Craigslist. It was like $250 a month to rent a room in this dump. And it's my first novel. I don't know what I'm doing, so I figured it'd be easiest to steal liberally from my own life. And so the apartment, for instance, that Milton moves into is the exact same apartment. I didn't give it the exact street address, so you won't be able to find the exact apartment. But yeah, I was in a little tiny room without a window and paint peeling off the walls, and everything was busted and dirty and disgusting. And it was probably a nice apartment 100 years ago, but students and layabout artist wannabes are hard on houses.
Yeah, well, layabout artist wannabes play a prominent role in Dirty Birds, and I want to get to that in a moment. I gather that you got where I was trying to get to, which is how much of this book is drawn from your own personal lived experience, and by what you've just said, a fair amount has been drawn from your actual lived experience, and the rest has been heightened or exaggerated. So anyway, yeah, we'll get to the layabout artists and Montreal and Leonard Cohen and all sorts of other stuff, I'm sure, in a moment. But I thought maybe at this point it might be a good opportunity to get you to give us a little bit of a flavor of the book by doing a reading. And
Sure.
If that's something you want to do,
Yeah,
let's go for it.
I can read. So this is Dirty Birds, and I paid for this book. I didn't borrow it from the Milan Library. So I'm going to read just a short little piece from the beginning-ish, when Milton first gets to Montreal, and he has a hard time finding his apartment and then getting into his apartment, and he has a bit of a run-in with Naughty and the roommates. But he finally gets in, and he finally gets a night's sleep after a few hard days trekking across Canada in a Greyhound. And so he's sitting in his apartment. He's kind of taking in the atmosphere of the apartment and of the neighborhood he's just moved into. He's full of hope and optimism, and well, this is that. Avenue de la Paix runs along the imaginary border of the Mile End neighborhood of the Plateau region of Montreal. The cross-hatching of small residential streets and commercial avenues stretching from the downtown in the southeast, along the eastern slopes of Mount Royal, to the train tracks that run along Avenue Van Horn in the northwest. It had long been home to Francophones, Hasidic Jews, and emigres from Greece, with their wide array of bakeries and fruiteries and diners and smoked meat sandwich shops. Its favorite sons were brilliant men like Mordecai Richler and Leonard Cohen. But the plateau was now being overrun by trendy fair trade cafes, gourmet grilled cheese sandwich restaurants, and yoga studios catering to an endless supply of young Anglophones and their endless supply of asymmetric haircuts, plaid shirts, and fixed gear bicycles that were locked by eights to every pole and post in the neighborhood. A lot of these Anglophones are students at one of the two big English universities downtown, McGill, Canada's best attempt at a Harvard, and Concordia, Canada's best attempt at the Kazakh National Research Technical University. But many more of the Anglophone expats are refugees escaping the beige infinite flatness of Upper Canada, of Oakville and Scarborough, of Uxbridge and Etobicoke, of Milton, Ontario. Scores upon scores of them flock here, like Milton, Ontario, to be part-time writers, part-time waiters, part-time painters, part-time bartenders, part-time musicians, part-time baristas. They flock here to live 4 and 5 to a rundown Mile End 8.5 third floor walk-up. Flock here to learn the banjo and start noise bands and write poetry. Flock here when Berkeley didn't pan out and McGill was their safety. They flock here seeking asylum in the perpetual 20-something adolescence allowed by a cultural linguistic Anglophone bubble in the middle of North America's most cosmopolitan French city and the largesse of the depressed rents that go along with a permanent state of political rot. The differentness from Brampton and Burlington and the cheap rent is the appeal of Montreal to the skinny jeaned, horn-rimmed, pour-over hordes of upper Canadian Anglophone suburbanite refugees. It is very much another country. It is as far as you can get away from the 50 Shades of Beige of Mississauga and Pickering and still get home for the odd weekend so mom can do your laundry. But it's summer camp. It's not real. Not even for the lot of them too old or so done with their first comp lit degrees, the ones who at any other point in their history would be well into their middle age, the 19-year-olds, the 29-year-olds, the 39-year-olds going on 21, all have come to get on and hang out and hook up and get a deal doing it. That it's some of the most politically and historically fraught lip-shaped islands in creation doesn't matter one bit. That they've created an island of English sameness in a sea of French differentness, which itself is an island of French sameness, trying desperately to survive in a sea of English differentness, doesn't matter one bit. That they're occupying the heart of the largest city in Quebec, which is itself occupying the heart of the unceded territory that has been home to the Kananake, or Mohawk, Abenaki, Wyandot, or Huron, Ashinabeg, Algonquin, and the St. Lawrence Iroquois people for millennia, doesn't matter one bit. Centuries of complex historical, social, and political forces at work don't matter. All of the lands stolen, blood spilled, tricks played, and clever bureaucratic maneuvers used to settle the unsettleable argument over who gets the riches of the land don't matter. The riches of the land don't matter. The social tyranny of the church and the petty tyranny of Le Chef and the petty racism of Pure Land, the provocations of Vive la Quebec Libre, the Richard riots, Refugee Global, the Quiet Revolution, don't matter. The uprisings and mailbox bombs and martial law, the kidnappings and manifestos read on primetime TV, and the bodies found in trunks of cars at airports don't matter. Separatist governments, referenda, 0.6%, money in the ethnic vote don't matter. The compromises and betrayals, the triumphs and heartbreaks, the history of sorrow and disgrace blotted out by rah-rah hockey games that have replaced rah-rah wars, and the urgency of survival in a place that has winter 2/3 of the year, which has netted us this complicated country, don't matter. Nothing really matters because the struggle is not survival. The struggle is lugging a heavy bag through a park in winter without a toque to a room you're renting sight unseen from Craigslist for $250 per month with 3 other people while you flit through your 20s pretending to be a poet. And maybe real life will happen later. Maybe war or revolution or plague or famine or poverty will show up and demand more than barely rhyming free verse and home recorded noise albums of all the wandering 20, 30 something teenagers in Plateau. But until it does, asymmetric haircuts, fix gear bikes, and scavenged vegan gluten-free lentils and endless online petitions are acts of rebellion, are acts of courage, are acts of resistance against the infinite flatness. Until it does, the only thing that matters is that nothing really matters, but feeling good and taking a long way to the realization that barely rhyming free verse and home recorded noise albums matter least of all. And Milton sits at the very heart of this, taking a poop, and taking in the soap scum and toothpaste crust built up on and spilling down over what was once a lifetime ago, fine craftsmanship. And all it looked like was filth, decay, neglect, and half-hearted dreams of tens of thousands of adolescent, dilettante, part-time rock star, flautists, part-time florists. And all he could think of was where he might find a roll of toilet paper. So I didn't show you the illustration of this is the bathroom he's sitting in while he's thinking all these thoughts. And then I also didn't read, there's extensive historical footnotes to explain who the Le Chef and the Pure Land and Vive la Quebec Libre and all that stuff are. So I'll spare you those details. You can.
No, Morgan, that was incredible. Thank you for the reading. And you know, we began our conversation about the book and your summary of the book, talking about this main character, Milton, Ontario, and the saga that he undertakes in this sort of, you know, character study sort of situation. However, I mean, I'm very happy that you read the passage you read, because that really exemplifies the sociocultural historical critique that runs through this book. And that particular passage is absolutely scathing, and I feel like its targets are multiple. How would you characterize what you just read to us? What is it about, per se, in terms of Canada and settler colonialism and wannabeism, delusions of grandeur? What is authentic art? What is actual substantive, you know, art and conversation? I feel like a lot of that is in there. What do you make? How would you characterize what you just read?
Yeah, so Milton and me and a lot of my peers are kind of the first generation. What are we, geriatric millennials or something? Kind of one of the first generations where we had to leave home and to continue school, and we needed a university degree to get a so-called good job. Because for my parents, for instance, they are, you know, the farm I grew up on is a couple of miles from where both of my parents grew up, and they're still there to this day. And my mom recently retired, and my dad is someday retire from jobs they've had for 30 or 40 years. And, you know, they got those jobs right out of high school, started a family, got married, bought houses, all of this kind of grown-up stuff. Things that I didn't do until I was 30. I got my first like real paying job when I was 30, and my job title was intern. And that same year, I think I bought my first house, and it was this dumpy little fixer-upper in St. John's and these things. So like Milton, you know, I had to move off the farm. I moved to Calgary, and then I moved to Montreal, and I did a term abroad in Prague, and then I went to grad school. And so I just kept like kicking the can of adulthood down the road. and moving from a place where I had roots to a place where I didn't, so in this case, Montreal, and moving into effectively a bubble. Milton moves in downtown Montreal when I was there, and I think it still is to a certain extent, but Montreal's changed in the 14 years since I was there. But there's these English universities, and there's a lot of English wannabe artists and stuff from Toronto, like I said, who are living in this downtown in a French city, in this really complicated city in a really complicated province, which is part of the more complicated corners of this country. But none of that stuff matters, and you're allowed to be insulated from the real world, and just kind of go about your business, and you're ignorant to all of this. And so it's, for this generation of sort of people who are disconnected from their own roots, from the communities they're living in, from the history of the places that they're living in, from the sort of full-time residents of these places, they're disconnected from all of these things. And so it becomes really difficult to, have any meaningful connections. And Milton, I think, struggles throughout the book, and the number of the characters struggle throughout the book to find these meaningful connections and figure out, it's not about being famous or a famous poet or ladies man or anything. It's about, finding these roots and these connections and these meaningful things that are more profound than, any fleeting sense of fame or anything like that. So there was that big part of it. And then I have a Canadian studies degree, so I know way too much about Canada. And I think, it's kind of you're failing as a writer, I think, these days in Canada, if you're not writing about settler colonialism, because when you start to scratch the surface of Canada, that's all it is this kind of god-awful settler colonial project.
Yeah.
And if you don't acknowledge that and confront it in some way, I don't think you're doing your job. So I wanted to make sure that that was in there, and have Milton kind of, swim around in not being connected to anything, and he's a tumbleweed blowing in the wind, kind of.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate your answer there. And I should say, we do have some people watching us. I mean, we always have people watching us. It's a surveillance state. But in the context of this conversation, we have some people who are attending this talk. And in some cases, we are going to, take some questions from people. And we've gotten one already that you answered in your last response. So thank you for that, Morgan. But I do want to encourage anyone listening or watching this right now, if you have a question for Morgan, please do post it in the chat, and we will make sure he addresses it. So appreciate that. And since you wrote this, I appreciate what you were just saying, Morgan, in terms of the way a generational cohort in Canada has been behaving, maybe oblivious to the politics around them and the history of the places that they land in after leaving home. And I appreciate that commentary. But since you probably started writing this book, there will be some who will acknowledge there seems to be a bit of a paradigm shift in our acknowledgement of our culpability in our treatment of Indigenous people, of our treatment of others. It's hard to talk about this right now in the twilight maybe of a pandemic, when we've seen human behavior at its most selfish and ill-informed, and I don't want to delve too far into that. But I will say that since you wrote the book, I'll go back to what I was saying. I think since you finished this book, I think there's been more of an increased awareness about some of the issues that you address in your book via Milton, via his trajectory. Would you agree with that? I know it might seem incremental, but would you agree there seems to be more of a discussion or discourse about what are we doing? Why do we live here? How did we get here? What did we do to the people who lived here before? What do we do about that now? Do you feel like there's more of a recognition about that?
I think it's building. It gives me a lot of hope when, like, for instance, the best-selling books in Canada, the CBC puts out the top 10 books every week. Dirty Bird still hasn't made it, but maybe this week.
Dirty
But
Birds, by the way, has had a fair amount of success, hasn't it? I mean, in terms of
yeah,
CBC recognition, you've been talked about. The book has been talked about and recognized by the Mother Corp, hasn't it?
oh, it has. I've somehow made the long list for Canada Reads, and I've been interviewed on every CBC show in Saskatchewan, for instance. But I got a lot of love from CBC. It's done remarkably well. I was just kind of kidding about the bestseller thing, but no, it's totally exceeded all of my expectations, and I didn't know what to expect. So it's been wonderful. But it's given me a bit of hope that all the best-selling books for the past number of months have been largely, the majority of them have been books by Indigenous authors. So I feel like those voices are starting to be heard much more. The general public awareness is starting to grow a little bit. I think it's now within the realm of possibility, I feel like, where it may not have been 2, 3, 5 years ago, that one day we may actually come to recognize that Canada is based on a lot of horrendous crimes and genocide, and we need to actually address that in a meaningful way. And it probably will, take some real soul searching by settler society and returning land and wealth and things that have been stolen. But at the same time, you can kind of get bummed out again. This past summer, there was an election in Canada, which we all needed, like we needed a hole in the head. And it was extremely disappointing that, we spent all of the spring and the summer discovering these unmarked graves of children, which, if that doesn't, at least give you pause, if not blow your mind, and make you do some serious soul searching about what this is we're up to here. That's a huge thing. And then, months later, we're having an election and it barely comes up. We're talking about housing and not, housing that's unlivable or unaffordable. We're talking about, housing for the middle class in Vancouver and Toronto and stuff. It was barely acknowledged at all during the election. The government was continuing to sue the kids in court. All of this stuff was happening. And then a week after the election, there was the first National Truth and Reconciliation holiday, and the Prime Minister goes surfing. So we've got a long way to go. But I agree with you that there has been a growing awareness of it. And like you said, the pandemic has shown, I think, both sort of the best that we can be, as we shut down the world to protect our most vulnerable, but also when we get bored of that, we can also be the worst we can be and start to do sort of selfish, unfriendly things. And I was hoping to be in Alberta for this, and we're hoping to be in person, but Alberta's kind of fallen victim to people not thinking about their neighbors as much as they're thinking about themselves or some nonsense they're reading on Facebook and stuff. So.
No, I appreciate that. I, for one, am pleased that we aren't meeting in person because I like being in my home, and I spend a lot of time on this mural, and it would be a shame.
We'd have to do it from your house if.
I know, we'd have to do it live here with my mural. Yeah, that's what that's what I think. We do have a question here, and it's a relevant one, because lest people be not led astray, we've obviously been talking about some very heavy and serious issues as they are reflected in Dirty Birds. Dirty Birds is also incredibly funny, incredibly witty and charming, and as you can maybe tell from Morgan's presentation here today, he's a very sharp and funny fellow. So one of the primary characters in this book, it's not simply that Milton, Ontario, idolizes Leonard Cohen, or at least sees him as a bellwether for what life could be. Leonard Cohen actually figures into the book as a character in much the same way that certain characters in maybe Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, or more recently Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a real character put in maybe a surreal circumstance. Anyway, I won't give away too much more, but we have a question here from Louise MJ, is what they go by here on the Zoom. Have you had any reactions to your book from Leonard Cohen fans? Thank you for the question, Louise. Morgan, can you feel that?
Yeah, so Leonard Cohen, without spoiling anything, he figures prominently in the last half of the book as a character that Milton meets and has some interactions with. And he, how can I put it delicately? He's not necessarily a good guy, we shall say. And so it was interesting writing that. I started writing it before he passed away, and then he passed away. And then when I sent it to the editor, we were talking about it, and the friends I let read sort of early drafts, and the editor and everybody I sent it to early on, the first thing they said to me was, does it have to be Leonard Cohen? Couldn't it be somebody who looks like him and acts like him but has a different name? And I was like, no, it has to be Leonard Cohen. And I wanted to be Leonard Cohen because Leonard Cohen is effectively Milton's God. He's who Milton aspires to be most like, and he reveres him. And strangely, the country reveres Leonard Cohen in a way. There's a huge, speaking of murals, a mural of his face in downtown Montreal on the side of an entire building. And he's
wait, you say strangely, and I do recall this from our conversation on my podcast. Leonard Cohen is idolized by people around the world. You have some misgivings about Leonard in terms of what he was able to achieve given his skill set, so to speak. Is that, I don't want to color your, sorry, can you speak to that? What do you make of Leonard Cohen, first of all, the real Leonard Cohen?
Yeah, so the reason it had to be Leonard Cohen was I wanted Milton's hero to be a fairly toxic male figure that sort of leads him down an unsavory path. And Leonard Cohen, you know, I fell into his trap too. I listened to all his music and read all his books and all his stuff when I was younger. But I gradually came to the realization, and then in writing the book, I listened to a lot of his music and listened to a bunch of interviews and watched, you know, documentary footage from when he was at the height of his powers and everything. And he was kind of a creep. A lot of his songs are about sex and the objectification of women. Right. It seems like he didn't just sing about those things, but actually lived his life that way. You know, I don't know Janis Joplin, but she probably wouldn't like having one of her legacies be the song by, you know, a guy she hooked up with about their hookup. And I get a kick out of, it's Leonard Cohen's song, Chelsea Hotel, is about, he came out and admitted it was about Janis Joplin. And it's like this kind of vicious, nasty song about this woman. And then at the end, he says, I don't really think of you that often, but he spent like 60 years of his life singing a song for money. And he's got one song in particular that stands out, is on his album Death of a Ladies' Man. It's called Don't Go Home with Your Heart On, which that's pretty much what the song's about. And so he sings these like creepy songs about sex and the objectification of women, and he seemed to not always be the nicest to women. And he was really part of this like class of male art heroes in the middle of the 20th century, from like Ernest Hemingway to Charles Bukowski and the Jack Kerouac and all of these guys who became super famous on works of art that were very closely parallel to their own lives about how shitty they were to women. And so I wasn't too, the more I got into that part of Leonard's life, the less I got too concerned about upsetting him or his ghost or his fans. And I've only had a couple bad Goodreads reviews where people were upset about things I said about Leonard Cohen. But as my editor told me once I finally convinced him it had to be Leonard Cohen, he said, well, the dead can't sue for defamation, so you should be safe unless he haunts you. So nothing yet.
Well, I mean, it is a work of fiction after all, but I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, yeah.
And I should say that all this with the qualification that I don't know Leonard Cohen personally. He could have been a lovely man. But his public persona was very carefully crafted, I felt, by him. And he stuck to this persona very closely. And that persona was that of sort of the ladies' man. And so I wanted just to take that public sort of caricature of him and use that as a character in the book, as sort of a terrible example for Milton to try and follow and fail.
I think people maybe idealize him because he was a small little man who seemed to live life to the fullest. And but to your point, I mean, in an age where I can't recall a time in my lifetime, but maybe I've only been paying attention more lately, where we are kind of constantly asked to commiserate with and empathize with anti-heroes. Like, that's a real strain in our culture. Like, everyone's flawed, and even the most cheery person you realize has demons and darkness. And so what you've done with the specter of Leonard Cohen here, who is, you know, by most accounts, for people certainly outside of Montreal, patron saint of Montreal, you've kind of brought him down to a level where after you're reading it, you're like, what if he was actually like this? What if he was really, you know, I met Leonard Cohen the one time and he was very nice to me, although his comment to me, I'd never met him before, I said, hello, Mr. Cohen, I'm Vish. He's like, hey man, it's great to see you again. I don't know what that means. We've never met before. Who does he think I am, you know? But whatever. He was very nice in the moment, and it was lovely, and it was a night celebrating him in Toronto. So it was just a very warm feeling. Then I read your book. I'm like, oh no.
I'm sorry.
You know. Anyway, it's a really fascinating book in that regard. I guess. And by the way, for those again in the chat, if you have any further questions, we are getting close to the Q&A period where I think we might even be able to open the Zoom floor. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know we were supposed to cordon off some time in this hour for Q&A. So thank you again for those of you who have been adding questions in the chat. Please feel free to continue to do so. But I guess, Morgan, this is kind of a difficult question. Everyone's going to have their own subjective opinion about you and your book. We've talked a little bit about the underlying and overlying commentary that you've included in this book. What do you ultimately hope people take away from Dirty Birds, which, by the way, is named for a documentary in the book, as I recall, and which in itself, there's a lot of commentary about fame and fortune and timing and why do some people succeed and why are some things celebrated and other things aren't. I know there's a lot going on in that regard as well, which we haven't had a chance to really get to today. But ultimately, what do you hope people take away from Dirty Birds after they've finished the book?
So sort of in order of importance, it's satire, so you should laugh. First and foremost, I hope you find it funny. And after that, it's satire, so it also has sort of some political and philosophical questions that I hope it raises for people. So for me personally, it was my first book, and the first book always kind of looms large in your head because you carry it around for 30 some years before you spit it out. But I was interested in questions about, you know, prolonged adolescence, the disconnection from everything, how a young white cisgendered male like me grows up to become a decent human being in the world today, when sort of all along the way we're subjected to all of these examples like Leonard Cohen that aren't always the best examples to follow. And, you know, people like me and people like Milton and people like Leonard Cohen for all of human history have had unchecked power and privilege. And like we talked about a little bit earlier about maybe the turning tides of colonialism in Canada, hopefully. There's also sort of a turning tide of sort of masculinity and misogyny and the patriarchy and all of that stuff, where we're still electing spoiled brats, and Donald Trump is very much a current event, but at the same time there's more voices speaking out against that kind of thing. There's more just like I said, the books coming out in Canada and the United States, there's so many great books by Indigenous authors, by Black people of color authors, immigrant authors, and all of these different diversity of voices. So that's great to see. So I wanted to kind of pack all of those kind of things in there, questions about Canada and media and subcultures and all of these kinds of things we've talked about, art and the whole works, but make it all funny and kind of I see humor as a great way to sort of help people lower their guard down and kind of get vulnerable, and then they can kind of step into those questions a little bit more, hopefully, and dwell on them and think, was Leonard Cohen all that great, and was what he represented what?
Well, I think that is one question we could ask. However, in the context of your book, I think the answer to whether Leonard Cohen was all that great is no. We'll leave it at that. There are some questions coming in the chat. One of them, of course, I mean, this is a natural one. Are you working on something new? And the person has added, please say yes.
Yes. I'm going to turn my camera and hopefully not show you too much of my disaster of an office. There's the door.
Whoa.
So this is a cupboard in my office that has a shiny surface. So I've turned it into a whiteboard. And this is my 100 generations of descendants or ancestors for me. So I won't spoil that for you, but so we have a new baby. You can probably hear him screaming upstairs. His name's Charlie. Before he was born, we were trying to come up with a really great name for him. And we both did our family trees, me and Katie. And Katie's a Cape Breton purebred Scot. Her family is Scottish back to the beginning of Scotland. So all the names in her family tree are Angus and Catherine and John Angus and Angus John. So our choices were fairly narrow on that side. And I didn't know my family tree super well. I'm a prairie mutt. I'm half Saskatchewan, half Ukrainian Albertan. But that just means I'm Ukrainian, Dutch, English, Irish, Scottish, Swiss, German, you name it, I'm it. And I knew basically my heritage that way, but I didn't really know where my great grandparents were from, how we all got to Canada, how I ended up in Caroline, Alberta, all of this stuff. So I signed up for ancestry.com, which is a horrible rabbit hole. And so he's 2.5 months old now. Probably 6 months ago, I spent probably a month doing nothing but looking at ancestry.com. And if you're not familiar with it, if anybody like long lost 15th cousin does any work on any aspect of your family tree, you can steal their homework and it kind of just pops into yours automatically. So I went from not knowing any of my ancestors, basically past like 2 or 3 generations, to names popping up going all the way back. And my mom's side, there's a side of that tree that they're the most interesting characters in my family tree, we'll say.
Oh.
And so like one uncle, my great grand uncle, I guess, he was, I knew him a little bit. He died when I was like 12 or 13. I knew him as this like hoarder who would go to the dump and collect all the treasures. And he had a mountain of old bicycle frames, and he built a 100-foot tower out of washing machines, and he fenced his 300-acre property with old bed springs, and he built a giant barn out of pesticide cans and all this stuff. He was a very interesting guy. And so that branch of the family tree, I found out in Ancestry, if your ancestor is a nobody, it just pops up as like a blue or a pink silhouette of a person. But then 4 or 5 generations back in that side of the family, the faces started popping up and like painted portraits of people. And so I started digging into it a little more, and it turns out I'm descendant from British nobility in probably the poorest and the strangest branch of my family tree. And there
Isn't
were
this,
some
Morgan,
admirals.
Morgan, isn't this kind of common when people start digging through ancestry.com, where they discover like they're digging through like you have been, and then they'll be like, hey everyone, guess what? I'm related to Mel Torme. And you're like, okay, good. Yeah, he was and you're like, okay, are you sure? Is that what the website's telling you? Yeah, no, it says. And now that explains all the scatting I do in the shower. And you're like, okay, I guess.
Are you doubting my
No, I'm
noble
not doubting.
lineage?
I just find everyone who goes digging through this website is like, I found out Napoleon once babysat my aunt. And you're like, oh,
There you go.
interesting. Anyway, no, it sounds like what you're saying is all of this digging, fodder for some kind of project. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, so my 7th great grandfather was the admiral who fought against Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars. My 12th great grandfather was the Italian tutor for Elizabeth I.
Oh,
My 25th great grandfather was William the Conqueror, who
wow.
conquered England.
Okay. Yeah.
My 41st great grandfather is Charlemagne, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire.
This is quite a website. I mean, this site sounds legitimate.
It's totally legit. It's the internet said. And the funny thing happens when you get to Charlemagne, and like if have any European heritage whatsoever, Charlemagne's probably one of your grandparents, because 41 generations back you've got like 10,000 grandparents, but that's beside the point. I'm special. I'm descendant from kings and empires or emperors. But when you get back to Charlemagne, he was like one of the last of the like crazy emperors who wanted to be connected to the gods. And so he hired poets to write the like chronicles of French kings, which connected them to Roman kings, who were connected by Virgil and his poetry to Greek kings. And on the internet, I can trace my family tree back 100 generations to Gaia, the Greek primordial goddess of Mother Earth. And so that's where I come from. So I'm going to write a book about all of this and about how a family went from one of the most powerful families in the world to dirt poor, dirt farmers in rural Alberta. And it's going to be a really big, long book, and it'll probably take me 100 years to write it.
Well, no, that sounds fascinating. You got to give yourself something to do. That's fair. We have a trilogy of questions. Since you're all obsessed with the prequel to your life, let's get to a trilogy now.
All right.
This is from Ava. Can you talk about your process of writing this book? How long did it take? Where did the idea come from, etc.? I feel like maybe we got to where the idea came from, but I don't know, maybe not to Ava's satisfaction. I apologize, Ava. But the other stuff, can you talk about your process and how long it took? People always want to know how long it takes you to write a book. I find that interesting.
Yeah, it's a good question. It depends when you start counting. So I'll be quick. And it's my first novel, like I've said multiple times, so I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to write a novel. I just didn't know how to do it. And so if you start counting of when I started collecting material to put into the book, it started at least in 2007 when I moved to Montreal and started doing my research on my research trip. And I was there for almost a year and a half. But the actual writing of it itself, I didn't start till the late fall or early fall of 2018. And the publisher wanted...
Just sorry, Morgan, I want to clarify something, because I couldn't tell if you were being facetious when you said you were living in Montreal, researching a book. I feel like you said you were researching a book you didn't know you were going to write. So I just want to home in on that for a second. Were you in Montreal thinking you would someday write a book, or was that a joke?
That's a joke.
Okay,
I didn't think I'd ever write a book about it. Okay. But then when I got to, I need to write a book, it was sort of the easiest material to pick from, because it was a condensed period of time, and there was sort of ready-made characters and an ugly apartment to live in and all this stuff. So I sat down and started typing it in 2018, but in the interceding like 11 years there, I probably spent a couple of years just picking away at coming up with what the ideas were, what the plot was, and all things like that. So I had a day job and life and things like that, so I didn't spend a whole lot of dedicated time to it. But I started working on it in earnest in like September 2018, and it took about 3 months to write the first draft, working after work and on the weekends and stuff.
I see.
And then it took a year. Well, there was delays and everything because small publishing on a good day is slow, and COVID happened. So the book didn't come out until last August, I guess, but sort of that year and a half in between, we were editing, and I thought it was a good idea to put a whole bunch of illustrations in the book. So there's 70 plus illustrations of things like this. And so I had to draw all of those and figure all that out, and design and editing took a long time. But the interesting thing about all of that stuff was I'd never done this before. I was kind of dreading the editing process and all of the sort of nitpicky detailed stuff, but it was far more enjoyable than I thought, because you're talking about these ideas and the book, and you're trying to make it better and working with some people on it. So it was kind of fun. So yeah, it took a couple years to go from start to finish, and I'm trying to work more diligently on this new book so it doesn't take 12 years to come out, but we'll see. I started a Patreon, shameless plug. If anybody wants to check out my Patreon of how it's going on the new book, I put videos up whenever I'm not having a baby. So
what's your Patreon handle?
I think it's just Morgan Murray, maybe.
Okay.
I have a website, morganmurray.ca, and it's got all the links and stuff.
Okay.
I should have been better prepared, but there you go.
No, it's fine. Okay, so we've prequeled, we've trilogied. We have another question here about the future. Where do you see Milton 10 years after the end of the story in the book? This is from Louise again. Thank you, Louise.
Louise, you got some good questions.
Yeah.
It's funny because I got so into this book and like the world of these characters, and it was kind of fun making Milton sort of the worst case scenario of all my bad decisions when I was younger, and just beating the snot out of that character. So that was fun. But then you get so into it, and then you're thinking about, what are you going to do next? You're like, oh, I could write 100 more Milton books, because I knew it so well. So I resisted that urge because I wanted to do something else. But so I thought a little bit about it, and I feel like Milton, he's a punching bag in a lot of ways for all of this stuff that we've talked about, and a lot of stuff we haven't, and for Leonard Cohen. And so he can't be too much of a success in 10 years. So I feel like he's back in Saskatchewan. He's back in Belly Button. He's probably working at the farm supply store still. But I also feel like those 10 years were probably punctuated because he's a very slow learner, and he got this idea in his head when he was like 12 or 13 years old that he's going to be a poet and a ladies' man, and he doesn't let that go. That's the only kind of remarkable thing about him, is I wanted to make him as bland as possible. But the one thing that kind of stands out about him is his sort of how tenacious he is to his ambition of being a poet. And so he'd probably like get into more sticky situations and make more bad decisions pursuing this ill-conceived dream of his. But I feel like he always ends up back working at the farm supply store, living in his parents' basement in Belly Button, Saskatchewan.
It's a good question, because you as an author, you create this world and these characters, and then when we all close the book at the end, they're kind of gone. And so it makes me, for you and your relationship with these characters, I can see you being like, I kind of want to, this is why people start series, I guess. They're not done. So, yeah. And, to me, I read the book and I thought this could be, if there was any justice, this would be adapted into something, a production of some kind, because it's very vivid. And so hopefully we haven't, I guess, to Louise's question, hopefully we haven't seen the last of Milton, Ontario, perhaps.
That would be a lot of fun to continue his adventure, maybe not with another 600-page book.
Yeah, the girth of it seems to have shook you, and you're the person who made it. But it breezes by. I love it. It's a great book. We've asked a little bit about your future projects and plans. You mentioned that you have a very young child named Charlie. What's next for Charlie? What do you hope he gets up to in the near future?
Well, he's starting to hold his head up. Maybe some rolling over in the future pretty soon.
Yeah.
We'll see. Right now he's big into just eating and puking as much as he can. He's doubled in size in 2 months. So we'll see. By Christmas, he might be walking and talking and, have a job. So,
well, I mean, it's nice to hear that he's eating and puking as much as he can.
Oh,
clearly an ambitious child. So that's great to hear. Well, Morgan, this was really fun for me. Maybe not for anybody else. Maybe not for you. I don't know.
Great time.
But anyway, I'm glad we got to chat again. And it says here for those watching and listening, Dirty Birds is available via Audrey's Books and also Glass Bookshop. And again, your website, Morgan, before we go?
morganmurray.ca. And absolutely support your local bookstores because it's pandemic's been hard on everyone, including your local bookstores. So buy 2 copies. Christmas is coming up.
It's true. Yeah,
Way ahead of you, buddy. Way ahead of you.
I thought I would pop back on when you started talking about like baby puke. I thought, okay, that's probably the end of this very intelligent discussion.
Jump the shark at that point.
Yeah, I want to thank you both. You could not hear me, but I was laughing out loud through most of this interview.
Wonderful.
We do have the book at the library. If you haven't read it, don't steal it from the library though. Okay.
Do not.
No.
You have to give it back, I found out.
But I do think, people should buy it. It's hilarious. And it is actually, it looks like a slog, but it is a quick read because there's so many great illustrations in here and the footnotes and everything. So
can I just throw
yeah.
one for related to that? It was recorded as an audiobook and it just came out at the end of August. So if you like listening to your books, that's a possibility. It pops up in some libraries. It's not in all the libraries on the apps and things that libraries have, but it's also wherever you get audiobooks. And David Ferry is the narrator. I couldn't narrate it because I wrote it in many languages I don't speak. But David Ferry is a wonderfully talented actor. He was born in Newfoundland. He lives in Toronto. He was in 3 Men and a Baby with Tom Selleck, Ted Danson, and that other guy.
Steve Guttenberg.
Steve Guttenberg.
Was he in Ghostbusters?
No.
He was in the Police Academy film. And, he was also in The Day After, which is about the apocalypse, and Short Circuits 1 and 2.
Yeah, I was just going to say Short Circuit.
Yeah. Hasn't made a movie since 1990, it seems like.
No, he's on the TV series Ballers on HBO.
Oh.
Sorry, I know a lot about Steve
Guttenberg.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Steve Guttenberg's good friend, David Ferry, narrated this book, and he did such an amazing job. When I first got to listen to it, I was giddy with how it was a completely different book. If you write a 500-page book or 530-some pages book, you have to read it 530 times in the editing of it. And so I know the book way too well, and I'm kind of tired of some parts of it. But listening to David Ferry read it, it was like hearing it for the first time. It was so great. He's amazing. So I suggest you get the book and listen and read along. Get it for all your friends. So yeah, there's an audiobook of it.
Okay,
it's cool.
That's fantastic. And I really hope, we couldn't bring you here this year, but I heard Kate has a graphic novel about Fort McMurray coming out.
She does, and it's really good.
Yeah. So, maybe we will have a chance to get you guys to Alberta. And Vish, you're on my list now as clever interviewers, so that's excellent.
Thank you very much.
So, this is the part where I do my thank yous. Thank you to Lisa, who's been in the background, keeping an eye on the chat and all the tech stuff. I want to thank our funders. Our main funder is the City of St. Albert, and we also get funding from the Friends of the St. Albert Public Library, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, the Canada Council for the Arts, And our media sponsors are the St. Albert Gazette, T8N Magazine, and Edify Magazine. I will tell everyone you will be getting a feedback survey at the end of the entire festival. We do really want to know what you thought. If you answer the survey, you get a chance to win a set of all the Starfest books. We also want to know who you want to see in 2022. So Morgan was on my list of who I wanted to see, but a lot of the authors came from suggestions from attendees from last year. So please keep an eye out for that. Tomorrow we have Glenn Dixon, the author of Bootleg Stardust, and he's going to be interviewed by St. Albert local Barry Bailey. It's going to be an afternoon celebrating 70s rock and roll, also quite a fun book, and you can get tickets at starfest.ca. So I'm going to say good afternoon, goodbye, and thank you again so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone.